to another episode of Straight Talking Leadership with me, Chris Piankowski. In these interview segments that I do called My Journey, I get the opportunity to talk with some really amazing people and learn about their leadership story. And the purpose here is to share some wisdom, share some nuggets that you're able to take back and apply in your life to help your leadership journey. My guest this week is Tim Ingle. Tim is an inspirational leader with over 30 years experience in the food and beverage industry. His background includes the Walt Disney World in Florida from 1987 to 1990, which at the time was the fastest growing growth spurt in the company's history. That's where he really learned about the importance of creating a culture that has a focus on service, quality, and value. Tim has led plant operations for the Quaker Oats Company and then guided a privately held food manufacturer to unprecedented levels of success in growth, people development, and operating profit. Most recently, Tim has joined the world's largest popcorn company as the capacity of Chief Operating Officer. This company is positioned as the gold standard in everything popcorn in a growing plant-based snacking industry. Over the past decade, Tim has created many valuable partnerships and relationships across the industry to support growth for his organizations, as well as supporting some notable philanthropic organizations, including the Folds of Honor Foundation, which supports families of fallen and disabled military heroes. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your leadership journey. So before we get into it, one of the things that I always like to do is a quick warm-up that I call the Mad Minute. Basically, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. They have nothing to do with leadership. It's really just to warm us up and get us into a flow. Ready for the Mad Minute?
Let's do it.
All right. First question is, you have a unique opportunity for a 24-hour round trip in a time machine. Do you choose to go back to some point in history, or do you want to check out the future in a 24-hour period of time?
Hey, can I do both?
Maybe you could split it up 12 and 12.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I think it would be really, really cool to go back. But it's a jump ball. I'd take either one, but I really think going back would be amazing.
I think there's so much that we can learn from just observing how things were done in history and seeing what unfolded and why. I won't put you on the spot and ask you when you'd go back in history. Second question.
Well, that's a good one though. I mean, if I can, I was just thinking of going back to, almost like the late 1700s and, maybe the Liberty Tree Tavern in Boston or whatnot. And, kind of listen to the founding fathers as they were, going through that whole process. That would have been interesting to have been a fly in the wall there.
That's probably one of my favorite times of history. And being a guy from Philadelphia, I've been to Independence Hall and all those historic landmarks in my hometown. And I thought so many times, like, it would have been so cool to just be a fly on the wall and see what was happening almost 250 years ago. So we would travel back to that point in time together. That would be awesome.
It would be.
Second question. You have the ability to shapeshift into any single animal anytime you want. What do you turn into when your heart desires?
Any type of animal. I mean, a tiger jumped into my head now. Who knows why? But maybe it's the stripes. Maybe it's just because they just seem like they've got it all together. I don't know, but that's what jumped into my head.
There you go. That'd be pretty cool. Tigers, I mean, ferocious animals. That would be a lot of fun, just hanging out, being a Tiger whenever you felt like it.
Yeah.
So, Tim, thanks for playing along with the Mad Minute. I always just like to do that to break the ice and warm us up. But you know what? Let's talk about your leadership journey. What was your first experience of leading people, and how did that go?
Yeah, so it was, I think it was very fortunate for me. I had an opportunity just coming right out of high school, 17 years old. And, the day after I graduated from high school, I'm driving down to Florida from upstate New York. And I'm, basically working at the Magic Kingdom in Florida, going through, even though I wasn't in college yet, I was basically on Main Street, USA, working alongside a lot of associates or cast members, as Disney calls them, and then some of the Walt Disney World college team members. And that really, through 4 summers working there, that's when I got exposed to my first supervisor, if you will, was a female manager, and her name was Becky Yan, but she really instilled, the Disney values, but just the way that they were so focused, so disciplined back there. Their mission was to be the finest in family entertainment, but every little thing, just from, basically being called a cast member and not an employee, basically you're on stage for a show every day and having the ultimate guest experience. What later I didn't realize was it didn't matter if it was the service industry, food and beverage hospitality, or food and beverage manufacturing. Quality is still quality, service is still service, and value creation is still value creation. And when I go back in time, from, Walt Disney World Florida opening up in, 1971 or 73, I think it was actually October 1 of 71. And knowing how Walt Disney set the company up, I mean, it was very focused on employee development and training and understanding all the things to do. So when people walked away, back in time, I mean, they'd save up their whole, 2-3 years to be able to take their kids down to Florida and go to the Magic Kingdom. But even though it cost so much, they saw the value in it. And I've also realized that nothing ever stays the same. I used to have an analogy: if you pour enough water in lemonade, it's no longer lemonade. And when I look at Disney when I was there and during that time, and I look at it now, I'm not making a judgment of good or is it better, is it worse, but it's a different company. And I think leaders that are able to maintain that level of focus, keep that lemonade, if you will, that formula strong, that you can achieve success by growing and multiplying talent without diluting that culture, which becomes so important. But when you do lose it, it's hard to go back and recreate. So it's always easier to keep a car running and take care of it and maintain it, just like you would your associates and just like your products. And, I always like to say products, people, and technology.
Yeah. The one thing that you said there was culture. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand, or they take for granted the importance of a culture in a company that attracts the right people, kind of keeps the wrong people from wanting to even join the company. Can you talk a little bit more about why culture is so important to you?
Yeah. So I was related, as you can tell, I'm a little vertically challenged, was never going to be a pro athlete, but I love sports. I mean, it didn't matter if it was, NHL hockey or NFL football, high school sports, everything. I look at winning teams, think of Michael Jordan back in the 80s and 90s. Not being from Chicago, not necessarily being a Chicago Bulls fan back then, but admiring the way that team was put together and the focus, and that not everybody's got a different role, if you will, but the importance of that culture. So if it's like work ethic and practice, if it's, what you're doing to support your team members, and I think that translates to business as well. I think people that are on a winning team, you build people up. It makes it fun. You can work hard, but you can enjoy what you're doing. And I think having that type of culture, it really separates, successful companies from others. I think recently in the pandemic, if I go to food and beverage again, kind of where I grew up and then ultimately went into manufacturing, but I thought of all the people or the restaurant owners or restaurants in general that complained during the pandemic or closed their doors or put signs up and said, sorry, uh, due to COVID or due to staffing, we're not open. And then I would see another company or another business, just basically prosper during that time. And I think it's the leadership, it's the focus, it's what you're doing, it's how you meet a challenge. And you saw the leadership that was able to make a quick pivot. Here's a pylon that just got thrown at us. The whole world's changed today. Are we gonna pout about it? Are we gonna give up, or are we gonna fight through it? And that's probably why I always use that tiger analogy, and maybe thought I'd be a tiger. But I think having that type of passion to differentiate yourself, from others.
How much do leaders play a role in not only the creation of the culture, but also making sure that it's kind of funneling down throughout the organization and making sure that people are aware of the values and what the company stands for?
Yeah. So, again, when I use some of the companies that I've been fortunate to work with, all, whether they're public or private, I don't think it matters. I think what matters is, do you have leaders that actually understand the business? They've walked, with the associates. They understand the process, the equipment. If they don't understand it, they go out and they listen and they learn. You don't have to be an expert, but having that level of engagement, I think, is extremely important in that culture. So you're actually leading more by example. I've never been a technical expert, but being able to, have the ability to communicate and to learn from those that are, do have those technical expertises, to where, you can help remove bottlenecks for them. So, I would say it goes back to how the leaders are actively engaged with the entire team, in tune with the business. And that's where, places I've worked, I would say, we don't have limousine bosses, or, that's one of the reasons why, manufacturing, I say it's not a spectator sport. It's not a work from home business.
Right.
You're in there, you're breaking bread with the people that, create the value right there. So I think when you have that intentional leadership that cares about people, is always trying to remove obstacles, that's how you maintain that type of culture. And it probably comes back to, maybe the last 10 years of my experience, where I used to always get turned off when I was younger, and people would say, well, you don't have a lot of experience right now. And I always thought that was a cop out. I was like, well, what do you mean I don't have experience? And then later I did realize the ability to learn from the past, see things that went extremely well, see how people met adversity, either in a positive way or a negative way, and then be able to make those, countermeasures. So you learn from those things, but being able to, put other people in positions and see them grow through that, I think that's, been pretty powerful.
Talking about putting people in positions to empower them to grow, and how that makes us feel as leaders, who is someone that has inspired you in your leadership journey?
It's really hard. There's always, sometimes people say, who do you look up to, or who is your role model, or, maybe the best leader. And, I always go back to growing up, and, my dad went to work every day, and, yeah, sure, he might've been not feeling great or what have you, but really learned the work ethic and learned the importance of, no matter what, you've got people counting on you. You lead by example. You show up to work every day. So I certainly watched my dad and learned a lot from him in terms of how he would be organized, and he'd make his lists, and how he kind of built his team. And he always was very bold back then, where well before, hybrid, and well before, people talked about quality of work life. But my dad always believed that his associates should take vacations, and definitely make sure they're taking all their vacation time, and specifically going out for at least a week at a time. And you'd always have the manager that, oh, I can't be gone a whole week. I mean, the place would fall apart. And he definitely was the type of person that would say, if you can't leave and the place runs, then you aren't doing your job. And I think that goes a long way. But to answer your question, I really don't leave it to just one person. Certainly a lot of things from my dad, but I look at someone like a Lou Holtz back in the day when he was a motivational speaker and a coach, and some of his abilities to inspire folks, and other coaches, that I've taken things from different people, and I think it's always everybody's strength could be their greatest weakness, like Winston Churchill would say. And I think that everybody, has, because they have strengths and weaknesses, not everybody's good at everything. So I really like to meet people all the time, learn from others, and take pieces of where somebody's successful in this regard, but maybe not so much in this other way. So, almost maybe like a mad scientist, where I take lots of things from different people, to make the perfect, leader, if you will. So
I like it. I do the same. I look at the attributes that I like from some people, and I use those as ingredients, right, to bake my leadership cake. And a little flavor from this person, a little bit from this guy. But some of those inspirational people, the message really comes through. And so right now, my middle son is 15, and he's been training jujitsu for 5 years now. Started wrestling in high school last year, and he's really focused on wrestling as a way to earn a scholarship. He's considering West Point as one of his options, but he's also the kind of kid who he tries hard. He's talented, but he needs that mindset tweak every now and then. And just recently, I gave him Tim Grover's book. Oh man, what's the name of his first book? Now I'm going to blank on this book.
Yeah, that's all right.
But it's Relentless.
Okay.
And my son is a huge basketball fan. He loves Michael Jordan. He loves LeBron James and all these guys. And so he's really picking up what Tim's putting down. And I hope that like plants an inspirational seed in him of what it means to be the greatest in the thing that you're doing, because, he's at a pivotal point in his life where, that could really make a difference for him.
Yeah.
So,
well, I do, you struck a chord when you talked about your son and being in wrestling. So, because of my size, it was fun to get picked out as a freshman in high school, since I was about 85 pounds, and the varsity team needed a 91 pounder. I don't even know if they have 91 pounders these days.
Yeah.
But what an amazing sport, because it, and then people that play football, or, everybody thinks whatever sport they played maybe was the greatest of all sports. But what I thought was so unique, and similar to, my son, who is in cross country and track, where, you're an individual contributor when you're running cross country or when you're wrestling. You come off that mat, winner or loser, you can't blame the other guy. I mean, you were the guy.
Right.
But yet there was a team sport because, somebody was the 105 pounder and somebody was the 215 pounder. And you had that camaraderie, but yet there was no excuses out there. And I think from a leadership standpoint, I do have to say that there's several different sports, but I think wrestling, does instill a level of leadership because you're taking that personal accountability. If you got pinned or you pinned someone else, I mean, it was things you did or adjustments you'll make. And, maybe the next time I wrestle this person or do this or that, I realized when I did this, it didn't go so well. And I think it's like anything else from a leadership standpoint or in life where, you do need to reflect and figure out where you're continually improving. And that's the other item I'd say, just from the experience part would be nothing really stays static, and leaders that can't change, can become extinct. Right. And,
Absolutely.
growing up, going to, upstate New York and then going to Purdue University, everybody out in Indiana, all they talked about was Bobby Knight in Indiana. And yet, people didn't realize during the time, they've had more banners to hang, but Purdue is, head to head, was always the nemesis of IU. And seeing, Bobby Knight, what a great coach he was. But at some point, all great coaches have to change. So when you look at a Mike Krzyzewski or some of these other folks that, when they coach for decades and decades, you have to be able to change. And I think Bobby, that was maybe one of his issues is, it was time to change a little bit. And he just didn't want to change. And I think you have to kind of react and respond to who your players are, or if you can't recruit the folks that you used to be able to, press certain buttons, it's a total different game now. So, yeah.
It is. And, I want to stay on this topic of coach for a second, because one of the things that I talk about from a leadership standpoint is that it's your job to coach people, right? You've got to bring your knowledge and help lift people up. Where do you say the balance is from, as you're leading people, how much are you coaching versus how much are you kind of pushing limits? Where do you fall in that kind of coach mindset?
So when I went through some, maybe 20 years ago, some, problem solving training, a few versions of Deming or lean management styles, there was a profound comment that it took me a little bit to understand, but it was talking about delegating responsibility and delegating authority. And some people are like, well, what's the difference? Or what do you mean by that? So I think you have to know as a leader, I can give this person responsibility to do something. Am I mature enough, or do I know when I'm also going to delegate the authority to go with that responsibility? I think where some people, especially today where there's a little bit of a drought for leadership in companies or businesses, where, how quickly can you grow leadership, if you will, within the organization? It's a tough thing to learn, exactly what you're saying, Chris. Do I push this person, or do I need to hold his or her hand a little bit more and guide and direct and invest some time because he or she's not quite ready yet? And, realizing on your team, you're going to have people at different stages and different levels. Sometimes, I've seen, pretty robust development plans where you actually put people through, almost like stage gates, that the more you earn the ability to have more authority, then, I'll delegate more authority and provide more responsibility and growth. So I think it's really an assessment on kind of knowing your people, working through those things, because I don't think that is a one size fits all. And I think there's a little bit of an art to it, and that comes back to really coaches, even, when we were talking about a basketball team or a football team, you know that you can push this player, but you can't push that one. And maybe you get that out of Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington, one of my favorite movies there, where, Petey's not one that, you can push as hard as maybe Bertier. So, yeah, I think that's where I like to use a lot of sports analogies, just because in business, like you win one day and you lose another day. I mean, at the end of the day, you're charting a course, and, are you winning more than you're losing? And, same thing with leadership and leadership development too.
Yeah. And it comes back to whether it's a sports team or a business, people have different personalities, and you as the leader have to understand how to work with each of those different personalities. I mean, it's really a juggling act in a lot of ways to all move towards the same direction and accomplishing the same goals. And it's also making sure that all those personalities are jiving with the culture. So that's where it just continues to become, more complicated as a leader. There's a lot that we have to juggle. And I think that people who haven't experienced it don't understand all the intricacies of what it takes to lead a successful organization. There's so many moving parts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you say is kind of your favorite part about leading people?
So it's definitely seeing them grow and be successful. I've really enjoyed, over the last 15, 20 years, seeing folks that came in with certain skill sets or abilities, or maybe a lack of certain skill sets and abilities, and yet see them grow and take on different roles, move into different areas. And, I always say it's a small world. And when you build that type of culture where you're developing and multiplying talent, that's a great problem to have when you have too many good people and too many leaders. But to really focus on those relationships, and to know that, wherever you go, whatever you do, you really feel good when you go home. And from, maybe the most fulfilling thing is knowing that you're helping other people become successful, and then they're going to be, turning around and hopefully investing in others as they continue to grow in what they do. So I'd say without a doubt, it would be seeing folks become successful, and maybe it's, kind of coupled with, multiplying talent. The other piece, I think, is just breaking down challenges and problems. A lot of people, everybody thinks that whatever they do, wherever they work, that it's so complicated, and it really doesn't have to be that way. And I think sometimes people almost try to justify how busy they are or how many things they have to do, and inherently that might be the problem. You've got too many things to do and you don't really get anything done, and you're not really adding a lot of value. So I think the other fun part is sometimes, it's easy to tell people sometimes that, this isn't for everybody. Maybe you should find out something that you really enjoy more. Not everybody's lucky enough to make popcorn.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, we all have to find our own kind of groove in life, and what people may see as, the glitz and glamour of leadership. And I like what you said earlier, you didn't have any limousine leaders. I think people get this idea in their head that once they hit a certain level, they can kind of kick their feet up and they've got people doing things for them. And that's the complete opposite of what leadership is, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think once people get there, whether it's through their, pure determination and hard work, that reality slaps them in the face. And sometimes it's hard for them to admit that, what, I kind of liked being an independent or an individual contributor more than I like leading people. But taking that step back is going to hurt my ego. It's going to, have me seen in a different light. And I've dealt with people like that, and I've said, like, at the end of the day, what makes you happy? And if the stress that you're feeling because what you expected leadership to be versus the reality of what it is, it's okay to say that's not for you. Like, you've made it, you've experienced it, and if that's not your cup of tea, then, go back and do what you really loved and what you were good at and have that happiness. Go home at the end of the day feeling good and not feeling, like you just want to scream your entire drive home and,
Right.
be miserable. Um, what would you say over the past 10 years has changed the most about you personally in the way that you lead people?
So, without being maybe repetitive, I do think it's more growing others. Basically not feeling like you need to be the one that gets up and maybe leads a meeting, or um, I don't want to use the word takes the credit for things, but basically putting other people before you in situations to where it's going to build their confidence more and they become a more assertive leader. And I think it takes, I don't know that I like using the word a level of maturity, but you realize that you get to a particular point, you're not driven to climb another rung on a ladder, or I want to become this, when this job comes open, or if this guy or this lady would hurry up and retire, maybe I could take their role, kind of the, somebody right out of college, and they're, it's kind of that dog eat dog type world. um, I think that's where, it just becomes more fun, because you're helping others be successful. You're putting them in positions to become more vocal leaders. In essence, if you sometimes say, give them the stage. Um, so I think that's what's been different. The other piece would be realizing, maybe it's a level of empathy of, everybody does have different things. And, you gave an example where maybe somebody is in a leadership position. They don't like really managing people, and you're able to, maybe rescope and define their type of position to where now they don't really, you take some of those things out of the position, but they're still very impactful. Maybe they're much more impactful, but you're taking some of those aspects that cause them anxiety or pain, or they're just flat out, it's not their cup of tea. They're just not good at it. And I think it's maybe somewhat liberating when you help people realize that, you know, and how can I make you more successful? How can I make you more happy? Because at the end of the day, I mean, you come to work, you spend a lot of time here. You want people to have a good balance. You want them to try to take levels of disruption from what goes on outside of work. People are people, and then in a lot of these leadership roles, right? When does work stop? When you're seeing people texting and emailing on vacation and doing Teams calls, and if you don't have the right type of discipline or the ability, back to when you said, maybe what's changed in the last 10 years, it's knowing when enough's enough, and you learn to delegate, or the next 3 days I'm going to be at this customer, or I'm going to, whatever it is, and you put somebody else in charge of something instead of trying to be the person that always rides in, the king of problem solving, if you will. I think that's a level of maybe they haven't had enough experience, or is that really what defines success for that person?
You know what you said there about a level of maturity, I agree with, because when I look back on my own career, if I'm looking in my early 30s, I wasn't mature enough to really be able to hand over the reins and say, yeah, I do trust someone else to do this job because I'm going to be away on vacation or I'm going to be visiting with a client. Um, And I think that it took me time just as an individual to mature and feel confident not only in my ability, but also confident in wanting to grow others. I think that's something that you grow into. Um, when you're a young person, you're, at least in my experience, you're looking out for yourself more than others in a lot of ways. And I think that can get in the way of your progress as a leader, but it's almost a natural progression.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tim, I want to wrap it up with one last question. And if someone asked you, and I'll use the example of, I'm in my early 30s, I'm just getting into my first real leadership role. What what is the most important skill that you would tell that person they should be working on and developing?
So it's still an ongoing opportunity for myself, and it would certainly be listening. Being an active listener. I always thought that's kind of an interesting way to jazz that word up. And I'm an active listener. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Actively listening. So I know there was a guy named Tom Peters back in the '80s, and he wrote a book called, and I think it was called In Search of Excellence, and talked about all these different leaders, and kind of the Southwest Airlines model, and some grocery store out in the middle of nowhere, maybe in South Dakota. But he had that term management by walking around. But I think when you couple that with active listening and good follow up, I definitely like to, and I learned this from Becky Yon in 1987, the 17-year-old, and she put me in charge of people older than me, right out of the gate. It was, you definitely follow through. It doesn't matter if it's the president of Disney World or the lowest level person on the floor. You treat everybody kind of as a VIP. So I always take pride. I can tell my owner or my boss, hey, I apologize that it took 10 minutes to get back to you, but I went out and I had an employee asking me a question. I wanted to get to him first, and you're kind of showing that you don't just look the other way because this person's quote unquote more important. So
Mhm.
being able to get back to people, especially when you get back to them, to let them know, hey, I did look into that issue. It's Friday night. Um, this isn't resolved, but I'll tell you what, I'll get with you first thing Monday. At least they go home saying, he got back with me. He cares about me. I think it's very important to have that. Another lesson that I learned, and it's funny that I keep going back to this lady in '87, but she invited me to a staff meeting, which I thought as a young, I wouldn't say a leader at that point, but a young employee. I was like, wow, why is she bringing me to this big important meeting? Only the big shots get to go to this meeting. And she said, I'd like you to go to the meeting today. And do you know what the meeting's about? Do you know where it is? And, she gave me a few pointers, and she said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, why don't we go together? And when I met her to go, she looked at me and she said, do you have a pen? Do you have a notebook? And I did. And she said, what are you going to talk about in the meeting? And I said, what am I supposed to talk about? And she said, don't ever go to a meeting without something important to contribute. And I thought
Ooh,
that was pretty cool. And to
yes.
think about a lot of people, my dad called them empty suits, but you would go to meetings, and my dad always said, you know what a committee is. And I said, what's that? He said, it's a group of people that are insecure to make tough decisions. But you get a lot of people on a Teams call, and there's 30 on the call, and 3 people do all the talking and everything else. It's like, if you don't add value, then why are you on the team? Why are you a leader? So always think about, how am I creating value? And I think if you know that you're creating value, if the people that work with you know you're creating value, everything kind of takes care of itself. And that's where I've had people early on, they're wanting to get a raise, or they're wanting to know if they can get their title tweaked. And I said, what do you want to do? Well, I want to get promoted. I want to become a vice president someday, or I want to become a director someday. I said, well, what are you? Well, I'm just a junior manager. I'm a senior manager. And we'll just start doing the job of a director. What do you mean? Are you going to give me that title? I said, no, I'm not going to give you the title, but it shows them that if you all of a sudden start doing that, and I think that would be the same thing, Tom Brady with Drew Bledsoe, if all of a sudden he goes in and says, I'm going to be the starting quarterback, and if called upon, I'm going to act like I'm the team leader. I'm going to be the best. And, look what happens. And I think it's the same thing in management or leadership. If you want to become more, well, then you need to do more. You need to create more value, and then it'll all take care of itself. Now, if for some reason it doesn't, then you must be working for the wrong person or the wrong company, because I think for most people, it all takes care of itself.
And that's a great lesson to end on. And it also kind of brings us full circle to culture, because if you're that person who is taking the initiative, but it's not being seen by the organization, like you said, you might be working for the wrong place. They're not recognizing the value that you're trying to create.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to be a leader, you've got to step in and do the work, and then the recognition comes. But always be willing and able to create value. That's an awesome lesson to end on.
You got it. Well, hey, thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate you being on and sharing your leadership journey. And for everybody watching, if you've gotten some nuggets of wisdom from this, please like the episode. Please share it with other people so that you keep spreading the word about straight talking leadership and what it means to be a leader. With that, I will see you all in the next episode.